the disciples said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." And I'm going to say that this morning as well, that the voice holds out once again. But I do have my faithful backup reader in the back just in case. And the Lord tells me, as he tells the disciples, I don't need to increase your faith. All you need to do is have just a little bit of faith. And I have that little bit of faith right here in your bulletin. I put the mustard seed. Because what he's telling us, and I hope we get from this sermon today, if you only have that much faith, just that little faith as this mustard seed, you can move mountains. And you know, I don't think he's talking about the kind of mountains we go see in Colorado or in Tennessee or in Alaska. And I hope during the sermon you catch a glimpse, just a small little glimpse of what I think he means by moving mountains. There was a man named Adrian Plass who authored what he called his sacred diary. In it he tells about how he had bought a book, and in this book it told him how to move mountains by faith. So he decided he would try it. And he practiced working up to moving mountains by using a little paper clip. And he put the paper clip on his desk, and he concentrated with all his might, and he meditated and tried to get that paper clip to move. But you know, nothing happened. And he tried commanding the paper clip with a very loud voice, "Paperclip, I want you to move." And the paperclip just didn't do nothing. It stayed right there. So then he promised God that if that paperclip would move just a little bit, he would just change his life completely. So he tried again. Nothing happened. A few days later, he got up early one morning and he thought, I'll give this thing one more last shot. And he concentrated as hard as he could looking at that little paper clip, and in his mind just visualizing that paper clip that was going to move, but nothing worked. And he said, I'm a failure. I'm a failure at faith. How can I move mountains with my faith if I can't even move a little tiny paper clip? Nothing worked. Finally, he gave up, and he went to open the door to his study, and there was his wife and his daughter standing there in their night clothes as he opened the door, and they were very intense, but they were also very distressed. And the wife said, "Darling, why didn't you tell that paperclip that you would straighten it out for life if it didn't move?" But nothing happened. He couldn't get that paperclip to get its act together and move. We know people are amazing. Somebody ought to just tell that guy that there is a big difference between faith and what is called telekinesis. Telekinesis is the alleged ability to move or bend objects with your mind. Examined closely, telekinesis was really revealed to be nothing more than a magic trick. There seems to be nothing to that idea of telekinesis. You know, in the early days, the gurus and the psychics and the mediums pretended to be able to move items by telekinesis, by the thought process, mind over matter, but it really is nothing more than voodoo or magic tricks. But you know where the idea came from of being able to move things if you had enough faith? By golly, it came from Jesus. We find it comes about in a strange little story of Jesus and the fig tree. You remember that story? Jesus goes to the fig tree on a Saturday, and he's hungry, and he wants something to eat. And the drive-ins were all closed for a holiday, so he couldn't drive through the local drive-through and get something to eat. So he stopped at this fig tree, and he looked at it, and there was no fruit on the tree. All he saw were leaves, and it made him angry. Think of that for a minute. Jesus angry? Holy cow. You mean he was one of us humans? And he showed some anger? And what did he do? He told the fig tree in one way or another how angry he was. He said, I hope you never bear fruit again, because I wanted some figs and you didn't have them for me. And all of a sudden, the leaves on the fig tree withered. And the disciples were looking at that and said, man, how did that happen? How did they lose their leaves so quickly? And so, Jesus looks at them in their awe, and in the book of Matthew, he says, truly I tell you, if you have faith and do not doubt not only what you can do, what was done to the fig tree, but also you can say to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, and it will be done. And you think about, hey, why settle for a silly little old paper clip when I can move mountains? And the disciples had seen Jesus do these amazing things, and now he was instructing them on the things he wanted them to do after he was gone. And this worried the disciples. How could they possibly do any of the things that he was telling them to do? Maybe he could move mountains with his faith, but they certainly could not. They knew even then they could not even move a silly little paper clip, much less a mountain. That is why in Luke's gospel, the apostles came to Jesus and said, increase our faith. They were literally begging Jesus. They said, hey, Lord, you're asking us to love people that we hate. You're asking us to forgive people who hurt us time and time again. You're asking us to feed the hungry. You're asking us to work for justice in a world filled with hate. Master, we are not you. We can't move mountains. All those mountains that are around us that you're telling us to move on a daily basis. We can't do that. We are not you. We don't have that kind of faith. And Jesus replied once again, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, just that little bitty faith, then you can move mountains. You can say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and thrown into the sea, and it will obey you with just that little bitty faith. But what did Jesus mean by faith as small as a mustard seed? You see, the mustard seed was known for its small size, yet everybody knew in that society that the bush to come from that tiny, tiny little seed grew into a humongous size bush if you have faith as small as a mustard seed. What is this faith that has so much power? Someone has designed faith as believing the dentist. Believing the dentist when he tells you it isn't going to hurt. Well, yeah. But the faith that Jesus was describing is so much more than that. Somebody else has said, faith is like a toothbrush. Everybody ought to have one and use it regularly, but don't use the other fellow's toothbrush. Use your own. Have faith and make it your own faith. Faith, as we talked about last week, and I will continue to talk about, is an attitude. An attitude is very important to the development of a good faith. Our attitudes can change our perception of reality, and faith can help us deal with reality in a more effective way. By changing our attitude, we can change our level of confidence. And then when we change our level of confidence, we can steady ourselves whenever it is that we're facing a difficult task. There's a story about a man that I like that he walked with a cane. And one time, some of his mischievous friends snuck away with his cane when he wasn't looking, and they cut just a little bit off of the bottom of the cane. And they continued to play that little prank on this guy every day for about a month. And one day they saw him and they noticed that he was really restless and kind of irritable, discontent. And they said, "What's wrong?" And he says, he finally got up the courage to tell them what he thought was wrong. He said, "You guys are going to think I'm crazy, but I think I'm getting taller." Well, he wasn't getting any taller. His cane was simply getting shorter. And his perception had been changed, but not his reality. See, he changed the perception and not the reality. And Jesus was talking about something that was far more powerful even than a changed attitude. And though having a changed attitude is important in the development of real, true, authentic faith, but by living a life of faith, we can develop positive, changed attitudes. You know, last week I told you, and I believe it so deeply in my heart, that faith is not just something that we think about. Faith is something that we have to live. What is it that makes positive attitudes sustainable? Well, they are always the result of confidence about life that comes from the source of being grounded in faith. Grounded in that we have a universal faith, a universal love from God. Because behind that universe is God. Can a positive attitude and a joy of life be sustained through years of endless crops and failures? I really doubt it. sooner or later we will say, somehow or another, we have to face reality. But faith in a loving God is reality. That's where my reality is my faith in a loving God. You know, I believe, and I hope you all believe, that it is a truism. God will not forget us. God will not forsake us. And we can endure any hardship that comes our way, any obstacle. And should we feel called by God to turn the world upside down, then we will discover what real faith and power is. Martin Luther King, Jr. is quite a hero of mine today. It was not always so. Years ago, I had little trust or belief or care for Martin Luther King. But as my faith in God, my faith in church began to grow, and I began to study, I began to realize what a great man of faith that Martin Luther King was. And he did turn this world upside down. And he understood. In his last address before his death, he issued a very triumphant statement, and it was a statement of his faith. And I have seen the promised land, and I may not get there with you, but I want you to know that tonight, as we stand here as a people of the promised land, so I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything, he said. I'm not fearing any man. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. I have a dream this afternoon that the brotherhood of man will become a reality. A reality with this faith. I will go out and I will carve a tunnel of hope from a mountain of despair. And with this faith, we will be able to achieve this new day. This new day when all God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join with the Negroes of old as they sing that old spiritual test, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty that I'm free at last. Powerful statement on faith. And some of you who remember the days of segregation in this country know what an enormous mountain that was that Dr. King and the other civil rights workers, and they did not think of that mountain and think it out of experience. No. Someone has said they prayed it out of existence. Maybe so. But it was their faith in God and not their faith in themselves that proved triumphant. If we are ever going to do away with our own racial hatred that we have in this country and that we have in this world, we have to continue to pray as did Martin Luther King and his workers as they prayed their statement of faith. Jesus wanted his disciples to understand that faith is a powerful force. The disciples, though, felt their faith was too weak to ever accomplish all the things Jesus wanted them to accomplish. That may be like you and me. We might think our faith is too weak. Our faith is too small to be effective. But my friends, it is not. And whenever we think about what we're called to do, please remember that if it is to be, it is up to me. It's up to me to take the first step. Jesus assured those disciples, as he assures us, that we do have, and they did have, enough faith. All we have to do is simply exercise that faith and that trust in God. What really mattered was not their size of faith, but the size of their God. Our God is big enough to accomplish anything, regardless of how small our faith may be. Even if our faith in any issue is smaller than that mustard seed, the size of our God is what is important. It is not the size of our faith. A little faith in a great God will change the world. Faith is a matter of aligning our lives with the purposes of God in the same way that a free hanging bar with those magnets going back and forth will align itself with the poles of the North Pole and the South Poles. What kind of world does God want? Deep in your heart, you know. A world where everyone lives in peace and harmony and dignity. And that is the kind of the world we will have one day. It's inevitable. God's kingdom is coming. God's kingdom is coming. The kingdom of righteousness, the kingdom of justice, the kingdom of peace, and the kingdom of love. If you want to see mountains moved or mulberry trees thrown into the sea, align yourself with the purposes of God. Again, it has nothing to do with the size of our faith. It has everything to do with the size of our God. The apostle said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." And Jesus replied, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it will obey you." How about it, my friends? Could you have just a little bit of faith in God? Just a little bit of faith in God? You may not move mountains. You might even not be able to move a silly little paper clip. But you'll be surprised with just a little bit of faith what can happen in your life and what will turn out good for you. Remember, most things happen in God's time, not in ours. But if you have patience and faith, they will happen. God says so. And you know what? That's good enough for me. Amen. Next week we will talk about why doesn't God answer my prayers?